Good evening and welcome to tonight's class brought to you by JNet. The subject is Lag BaOmer, which we'll be celebrating this year, this coming Wednesday night and Thursday, the 18th of the month of Iyar. We will explore some of the history and significance of this day and how it applies to us and what we can learn from it to live our lives in a fuller, deeper, more spiritual way. Starting with the name, Lag BaOmer. Lag is actually two letters, Lamed and Gimel, which have the value, numerical value of 33, and being that this day is the 33rd day of the Omer, the counting of the Omer, which begins on the second day of Pesach and continues on throughout 7 weeks, after which we celebrate the holiday of Shavuos, which actually means weeks, because it comes 7 weeks after Pesach, the first day of Pesach. The Omer is a measurement, a biblical measurement, and we had to bring as an offering on the second day of Pesach an offering of an Omer of barley, which was offered up in the temple, and beginning from that day, we would start counting the 7 weeks until we would reach the 49th day, the day after which would be the 50th, the day of Shavuot. Now, the period between this 7-week period is commemorated as 7 weeks of semi-mourning because of the following reason. During a period of 33 days, the students of Rabbi Akiva, 24,000 students, 12,000 pairs of students died in the plague. Some say that it started and ended on the 33rd day of the Omer. Some say it started later and ended at the end of the 7-week period. So some have the custom of mourning the first 33 days, some have the custom of mourning the second 33 days, some have the custom of mourning the whole 7-week period after Pesach, beginning after Pesach, because in order to respect both opinions. And each community has their customs, which needs to be respected by the members of their respective communities. But the point here is, why did the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva die? And what does that have to do with us, to the point that thousands of years later, we still commemorate the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot as weeks of semi-mourning, when we do not make weddings, when we do not listen to music, we do not cut our hair. Why? So our sages explain, the Talmud tells us that why did the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva die in this period is because they did not respect one another. Shalom na'agu kavod zelazeh. They did not respect one another. And that is why this plague killed them, and that is why we commemorate this episode in order for us to learn the importance of respecting one another. So here we need to understand 2 things. First of all, how is it that the students of Rabbi Akiva did not respect one another? Rabbi Akiva is the one that taught that the principle, the precept, the biblical precept of love your neighbor as yourself, love your fellow as yourself, v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. Rabbi Akiva says, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is a great rule in the Torah, which can also mean it's a general rule, which encompasses a lot of different commandments are inspired by and based on this concept of loving your fellow as yourself. So how is it that Rabbi Akiva's students did not respect one another? Wasn't it their teacher who taught the importance of loving a fellow Jew? How is it that they, his disciples, did not respect their teacher's teaching? So, and another question is, does that deserve the death penalty? Not respecting another person is not nice, and it's not the way we should behave, but is the punishment for that death? So the Rebbe explains the following. It does not say that they did not love one another. It says they did not respect one another. And the point here is the following. They loved one another greatly. And because they loved one another, that is why when one would see that his friend, his colleague, is doing something that does not reflect the teachings of their teacher, Rabbi Akiva, he would impose on him what he understood to be the true teaching of Rabbi Akiva. Now, if he wouldn't love him, wouldn't care for him, he wouldn't care what he does. He wouldn't impose anything. He couldn't care what he does. Right? Like the famous story of the boy that was introduced to a girl. They went out on a date, and he comes back from his first date, and the shadchan that set them up asks the boy, "What do you think of the girl?" He says, "Great." He says, "You think she's great? She doesn't have one tooth in her mouth. Doesn't matter. She has bad breath. Doesn't matter. She doesn't have a hair on her head. Doesn't matter. Her IQ is minus 20. Doesn't matter. She's ugly. Doesn't matter. None of this bothers you?" He says, "Of course not. I don't have the most minimal intention of marrying her. Why should I care about any of this?" So the point is that when do you care about somebody's behavior is when they are important to you and when you love them. And if not, you couldn't care less what they do, unless it interferes with you directly. So since the students of Rabbi Akiva loved one another, that is why they cared about the well-being of their colleagues. And when they saw them behaving in a way that was wrong, in their opinion, they wouldn't just ignore it. They would try to correct their friend's behavior by imposing their point of view on the other person. Now, that is okay if it's done properly. What happened was that together with that, being that they were also very honest, they could not respect their colleagues when they saw them behaving in a way that did not reflect Rabbi Akiva's teachings. So they lost the respect for them. And that was their mistake, because a person should criticize what somebody else does if he thinks it merits criticism, but that does not mean that he should criticize the person. Criticizing their behavior is not synonymous with disqualifying the person. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, at a lunch with some people, someone at the table mentioned about somebody, a public figure that everybody knows about, that person was proven to be a liar and a thief. So I stopped him and I said, "I think you're making a mistake. That person was proven in court to have lied and to have stolen. That does not make him a liar and a thief. That simply means a person who slipped and stole and lied on one or many occasions, but that does not turn him into a liar and a thief if he regretted his actions and paid the price that the court imposed on him." So the point I'm trying to say is that, yes, they loved one another, but they forgot to also respect one another. And because they did not respect one another, that is why they were open to the plague that killed them. Now, it wasn't a punishment for their not respecting. As we mentioned before, the punishment for not respecting a fellow Jew is not death. But what happened was that there was a plague going on, and had they been united and had they had the respect for one another that they should have had, that would have protected them against the plague. But being that they did not respect one another and there wasn't that unity that should have been there, they became vulnerable to the plague that was able to kill them. There's an interesting story that of a father who had many children who were always arguing amongst themselves, and the father wanted to impress them with the importance of living harmoniously. So he brought a pack of twigs and asked them, called them all to his bed, and asked them which of them could break the packet of twigs. Each one of them tried and none of them could do so. the father took the pack of twigs, untied it, and one by one broke the whole packet, one twig at a time. And this is what he showed them, that by being together, there is a strength that protects everybody, whereas by being separate, each one becomes vulnerable. And this is what happened to students of Rabbi Akiva. It wasn't that they were punished for their behavior, but their behavior made them vulnerable to something that they would not have been vulnerable had they behaved in a different way. This is similar to what the Rabbi explained about the power and protection that mitzvahs, especially the mitzvah of mezuzah and tefillin, have in protecting those in danger. That when the mezuzahs are kosher and the tefillin are kosher, then the soldiers have special protection, whereas if not, then not. And the Rebbe said this is not a punishment, but it gave the example of a helmet that a soldier wears when going into battle. He wears the helmet in order to protect him from any bullets that might come his way. And if he takes off the helmet and the bullet hits him, God forbid, that is not a punishment for taking off the helmet. The bullet was flying anyway. Had he had his helmet on, it would have deflected the bullet. Since he did not have the protection of the helmet, he was vulnerable to the bullet. So the same the Rebbe explains regarding having kosher mezuzahs, that having the kosher mezuzah gives you that protection against dangerous elements that threaten one. Not having the kosher mezuzahs makes you vulnerable to those threats that are there for whatever other reason they're there. So the lesson we have from Lag BaOmer, from the story of the 24,000 students that Rabbi Akiva had who died in this period between Pesach and Shavuot because they did not respect one another, we need to learn from there the importance of not just loving one another and caring for one another, but respecting one another and respecting what the other person needs in order for them to behave the way they need to. In other words, it's not enough for you to tell somebody who's doing something wrong that he's doing something wrong and to criticize them. Because what will the reaction be? What will you accomplish? You'll just make yourself feel better that you criticize somebody for doing something wrong. Is that your goal? Then okay. But that is not the goal, the true goal. The true goal is to help that other person modify his behavior. And the way to do that is by encouraging the other person and pointing out his misbehavior in a way that will bring about a better behavior in that person. So for that, you have to respect the other person. You have to respect his way of thinking. It doesn't mean to respect what he does if he's doing something wrong. But respect the way he will be able to overcome his own challenges and help him through that in order for him to be able to accomplish that which you believe to be the right way, assuming that you are right. So that is one lesson from the story of Lag BaOmer. Another thing that happened in Lag BaOmer was that that when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the, if not the outstanding student of Rabbi Akiva, after those 24,000 students passed away, Rabbi Akiva rebuilt the whole institution through new students. The most predilect of them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And as a matter of fact, we find in the Talmud has over 2,000 pages, and as far as I remember, you will never read more than 3 pages in the Talmud without coming across an opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which says a lot, because there are many sages whose opinions appear in the Talmud, but not with the same frequency. And so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as a matter of fact, the Talmud tells us that when Rabbi Akiva ordained his students, he put Rabbi Meir in the front row and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai behind him. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai felt sidelined. I mean, why was Rabbi Meir, the student Rabbi Meir, why was he sat in front of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? So Rabbi Akiva told him, listen, Rabbi Meir is a great sage. People appreciate his greatness. Your greatness is something that only I and your Creator can appreciate. In other words, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was so great that most people weren't even able to appreciate his greatness. That's how great he was. So that is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, to give you just an insight a little bit into who he was. And so he passed away Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, and he asked his students before he passed away that his day of passing away should be remembered with great happiness and celebrated, because that is the day that he felt that his soul is being liberated from the confines of his body and reconnecting to its source, to God. So for him it was a happy day, and he asked that for all posterity, that day should be remembered with great joy and happiness. And as a matter of fact, it is a day of great joy and happiness. It is the only day in the period of the Omer where celebrations are made, where weddings take place, where you can listen to music, and the main celebration is in Meron, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried, and where his burial place is. Hundreds of thousands of Jews converge on Meron for the day of Lag BaOmer, and there's a lot of singing and dancing going on through all hours of the night and day. And there's much celebration going on. Another way of celebrating is by building great bonfires. That is another way to celebrate. There are different reasons given for that. One reason is because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a great luminary, one who illuminated the darkness of exile through his teachings, and that is represented by the bonfires, which are lit all throughout Israel, all throughout the world on Lag BaOmer. As a way to remember what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's role was. Another way to celebrate Lag BaOmer, which was introduced by the Rabbi in the 1950s, is through parades, public parades on the day of Lag BaOmer, which maybe is based on the custom, probably is, as far as I know, based on the custom, historical custom, that on the day of Lag BaOmer, school children would be taken out of school, and they would go with their teachers to the parks, fields, and play there, typically with bows and arrows, which we'll soon see why. And the Rebbe took it up another notch by having parades, public parades, beginning in New York and then eventually in countries all over the world. The country with the most parades is Israel, where towns and cities all throughout Israel have parades where children demonstrate their pride in being Jewish and in their Jewishness. So, what is the reason for the bows and arrows? One reason is, historically, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in a time when the Romans forbade the teaching of Torah, punishable by death. Rabbi Akiva was once teaching Torah, and one of the students asked him, why do you teach Torah? If according to the Torah you're allowed to not teach Torah if it's a matter of life and death. According to the Torah itself, one may transgress any of the commandments of the Torah in order to save your life, with the exception of 3 transgressions which one must allow himself to be killed in order not to transgress, which is to kill an innocent person. If someone tells you kill an innocent person, if not I will kill you, then you have to allow yourself to be killed. Idolatry, if someone forces you to bow down to an idol, if not you will be killed, you have to allow yourself to be killed. And adultery or other transgressions of this nature, you have to allow yourself to be killed rather than to transgress. But with the exception of these 3, all other mitzvahs, all other obligations and prohibitions of the Torah are to be transgressed in order to save your life, if your life is at stake. So they asked Rabbi Akiva, why do you insist on teaching Torah if the Romans decree that we should not, and if they catch you, they will kill you? So Rabbi Akiva famously gave the example of a fox, a hungry fox that was walking along the shores of a river. When he saw a school of fish swimming very rapidly, he asked them, where are you running to? They said, well, we are escaping the nets of the fishermen who want to catch us. So the fox said, "Hey, why don't you come here and I'll protect you? I'll protect you against the fishermen. Come here on land, on dry land, together with me, and I will protect you." So they answered, "You foolish fox, are you not the wisest of all animals? How can you say such a stupid thing? If in the water, which is the source of our life, we are in danger, the minute we leave the water, we have no chance of survival." So too said Rabbi Akiva. If by learning and teaching Torah we are in danger, imagine what will happen to us if we stop learning and teaching Torah. Torah is the water of our life. It is the oxygen of our spiritual life, of our existence. So if while breathing oxygen and drinking water we are in danger, how much more so we will be in danger if we stop breathing oxygen and stop drinking water. And eventually Rabbi Akiva was caught and was killed. But during that time, people would teach Torah. They would take their children, the students, out into the fields, teach them Torah, and they would go with bows and arrows. If any Roman inspectors would happen to come by, they would take out their bows and arrows and make believe they were learning or practicing archery. So that is one of the reasons given for why we play with bows and arrows on Lag BaOmer, to remember that situation. Another reason given is because during the lifetime of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there was never a rainbow to be seen in the land of Israel. And the significance of that is, a rainbow in general is there as a symbol of God's promise never to destroy the world. As we find in the Torah, in the Parsha Noach, after the flood, when God destroyed the world, he made a promise with Noach that he would never destroy the world again. And that is when we saw a rainbow for the first time, which was to symbolize this fact that God promised not to bring any destruction to all of humanity again. The Rebbe explains, interestingly, how can we explain the fact that this natural phenomenon is to be considered a symbol when it's something that happens naturally, the way the raindrops reflect the light in the way that creates a rainbow. So since it's a natural phenomenon, how can we say that it is a sign of God's promise to Noach? So the Rebbe explains very interestingly that it is true that a rainbow is created by natural conditions of the raindrops reflecting the rays of the sun. But until then, after the flood, there were never the conditions that allowed for a rainbow to be seen. It is only after the flood that the first rainbow was seen, because the conditions were such that allowed for this natural phenomenon to take place. So that is the sign of the pact. In other words, the change wasn't really a change in anything, it was just the conditions were never such to allow the rainbow to be seen. After the flood, God creates the conditions for the rainbow to be seen according to the laws of nature. So basically the idea here is that whenever there is a rainbow to be seen, the custom is not to look at it for a long time, because it is a symbol of the fact that God wants to destroy the world, doesn't do so because he promised not to, but if not for that promise, he would. So therefore, it's not really a very good sign. So during Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's lifetime, no rainbow was ever seen. Why? Because of his greatness. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself said that he, through his own merits, is able to neutralize, to outweigh any transgressions or any reason to destroy the world. His merit, and if necessary, the merit of him and his son, Rabbi Eliezer, would be enough to outweigh any reason to destroy the world. So, in other words, in remembrance of that greatness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that it was so great as to outweigh any evil that existed in that time. So we play with the bows and arrows to remember the rainbow, symbolized by the bow and arrow. Another very interesting reason for the bow and arrow is the following. we find that there are generally two types of weapons that a person needs to defend himself. One is the sword, and one is the bow and arrow. Any other type of weapon is a variation of one of these two, as we'll soon see. The sword is a weapon that you use to defend yourself against an enemy that is visible and close to you. Bow and arrow is used against an enemy that is far from you and might not even be visible to you really very clearly. So these are the two. Any other weapons are variations of these two, either to defend yourself against an enemy that's close or to defend yourself against an enemy that is far from you. So just as we have our physical enemies that we need to defend ourselves against, there are also spiritual enemies that we need to defend ourselves against. So we have close enemies, close visible enemies against whom we defend ourselves through swords. And then there are far invisible enemies against whom we need to defend ourselves through bows and arrows. Who are these different enemies? The enemies are our own instincts. So we have instincts that push us to do things that are visibly or clearly wrong. So for that we have the sword. For that we have the halacha that tells us do this, don't do that, and to behave in a way that neutralizes the instinct that we have to behave in the wrong way. Right? Let's say we have an instinct to lie or an instinct to speak badly about somebody. So the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish law, tells us you're not allowed to speak badly about someone. You're not allowed to lie. So that is the weaponry that we use to defend ourselves against an enemy that is tangible and visible and close to us. But then we have battles on a different plane, on the level of ideas and feelings, right? That's a whole different struggle. Of thinking the right way, feeling the right way, not just behaving the right way. For behaving the right way, we have the Shulchan Aruch that tells us do this, don't do that. But how about thinking what's right and feeling what's right? For that, it's much more subtle, much more abstract. It's not so visible, not so close. For that, you need the bow and arrow. The bow and arrow would be, in this sense, the teachings of the deeper parts of the Torah, the more spiritual, mystical parts, esoteric parts of the Torah, which would be the Kabbalah and Hasidus teachings. Those are teachings that deal with thoughts and feelings and our struggles on the spiritual level. So that is actually what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's greatest contribution was. There were many sages that contributed a lot on the level of halacha, on the practical level. Do this, don't do that. And Rabbi Shimon had many others who taught along with him how to behave practically. But when it comes to the hidden part of the Torah, the Zohar is the book that was authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that contains the spiritual dimension of the Torah, which allows us to deal with our struggles that take place on the spiritual planes and dimensions of ideas and feelings. So that is why, another reason why we play with the bows and arrows on Lag BaOmer, to remember this specific and special contribution of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which was the teachings that he transmitted to us, that empowered us to face our challenges on the spiritual battlefield of ideas and feelings. Through the teachings of the Zohar and other teachings of that nature. There's a very interesting thought to be a very interesting teaching that we also find in the bow and arrow, and that's two things. First of all, that when you want to shoot an arrow, first you have to pull it back. You don't just pull it back, you pull it down. In other words, because if you want to shoot high, you have to pull the arrow, right? You pull the arrow down. And then you release it, and it flies up and far. So that is to teach us how we should approach the study of Torah. But first, we need to have the humility before we study Torah, and then our Torah study will reach its target. Because if a person approaches the study of Torah with arrogance or with self-importance, with his ego, then he will very easily miss the mark. Because what happens? If a person approaches Torah study and comes to certain realizations and conclusions and discovers certain ideas in the Torah which he attributes to his own intelligence and creativity, and he feels good about that, look how creative I am, look how intelligent I am, then if somebody else comes and disproves him, he will resist that because he doesn't want to be disproven, doesn't want to be diminished, because we're talking here about his accomplishments. We're talking here about his truth rather than the truth. However, a person looks for the truth, not his truth. The person is not looking to be right, but he's looking for what's right. Then if somebody else comes and shows him that what he thought to be right is not so, and there is something which is right, then he'll be more than happy to have learned that what he thought was right is not, and now he sees something that is right. But where does that come from? That comes from humility. If your approach to study Torah is to understand and uncover what is right, then if somebody comes and teaches you something, you're more than happy. Usually when two people argue, the one that wins the argument is happy and the one that loses is sad. It should be the other way around. Because the person that won the argument didn't win anything because he knew already what he knows. The one that lost the argument should be happy because he just learned something that he didn't know before. But that doesn't usually happen. Why? Because people want to be right. They're not looking so much for the truth. They want their truth to prevail. Not the truth, but their truth. In order for a person to care more about the truth than his truth, he needs humility. That is the idea of pulling the arrow down before releasing it. If your preparation for Torah study is humility, pulling the arrow down, then you will have a good chance of reaching the truth because you are open to be corrected and you're open for other people's opinions. However, if your approach is your ego, then it's very easy for you to make mistakes and you will not listen to anybody who is there to point out your mistakes and to correct you. So that is another lesson, important lesson we learn from this. We actually say this every day, several times a day, when we ask God, I should be as dust in front of everybody. Open my heart in your Torah, to your Torah. And one thing leads to another. When a person has the humility where he doesn't feel himself important, then he is able to be sensitive to the truths of the Torah, to God's Torah, rather than to his own version of the Torah. So this is an important thing to remember. We find that Friedrich Rebbe explains that the preparation for Torah study should be prayer, giving charity, going to the mikveh, many things of a spiritual nature, which one would ask, what does this have to do with intellectual success and prowess? But the point here is that to reach God's truth, God is infinite. How can a human mind contain or comprehend God's intellect, which is infinite? So that can only be through humility, because when you put your own self aside, then you are open to receive the infinite wisdom of God. If your approach is your own understanding of things, then you will be limited by your own understanding, because you are missing that capacity to put your own understanding to the side, or to put your understanding to the service of what needs to be understood, not what you would like to understand. And then one more lesson we find from the bow and arrow is that the objective of the bow and arrow, is to pierce the heart of your opponent. That is the objective of the arrow. Now, how can you do that? Before you release that arrow, you pull it towards your own heart. Then you release the arrow to try to pierce your opponent's heart. And this can also be understood in a positive way. If you want to influence somebody, if you want to reach somebody's heart, make sure your words come from your heart. Because words that come from the heart penetrate the heart. So if you really want to reach somebody's heart, make sure that what you're saying comes from your own heart. Then you have a good chance of it having an impact on the person whose heart you want to reach. With this, I conclude these thoughts on Lag BaOmer. I wish you an inspiring Lag BaOmer, that it should be a day in which we strengthen our own Torah study. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spent 13 years in a cave studying Torah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's whole life was dedicated to Torah study, to the point that he was exempt from prayer. because his only occupation was Torah study. And the Rebbe actually tells us we need to learn from him that our only occupation should be Torah study. The Rebbe says, how is that possible? Most people cannot dedicate their whole lifetime to study Torah. They must work, they have other obligations. And the Rebbe said two things here. One is that when we do Torah study, when we do study the Torah, if it's 15 minutes a day, an hour a day, or however much time we dedicate to Torah study, it must be as if that is our only occupation, as if we are in a cave and there is nothing else there to distract us. So it's not so much the quantity of time as the quality of the time that we dedicate. And also that even though we do other things, the question is what is the most central and important thing in our life. So that should be the Torah study. In other words, even though we do other things, that should all be corollary and there to support our Torah study, which should be the central point of the day. So may we all be inspired by these different thoughts on Lag BaOmer, and that should be an inspiration and motivation for us to increase and intensify our relationship with Torah, our relationship with Hashem, and that we may merit to see the coming of Mashiach speedily.